Fellow history buffs, what if the Great Sphinx was already ancient history when the first pharaohs were still wearing, well, basic loincloths? Picture the scene. The Giza Plateau, bathed in the relentless, blistering heat of the Egyptian sun. For generations, right? We've been told that this limestone guardian was carved around 2500 BC under the command of the pharaoh Khafre. It's a neat, tidy story, conveniently fitting into the established narrative of the Old Kingdom. But what if the textbooks are just wrong? And I don't mean off by a few years, or even a few decades, What if the experts have missed the mark by thousands of years? If the conventional timeline is, in fact, a work of fiction, we aren't just looking at a misdated statue. I mean, we're looking at a fundamental dismantling of our entire understanding of human history. We're talking about a civilization, sophisticated, organized, and capable of monumental engineering that existed long before the dawn of the empires we were taught to worship back in grade school. Why does this silent stone sentinel hold such power over our modern imagination? Because if the Sphinx proves to be far older than the pharaohs, then the story of human progress is not a straight line upward from primitive hunter-gatherers to the masters of stone. Instead, it becomes a cyclical tale of rise and fall, a lost chapter of humanity that predates every known empire in the region. Shh. Just think about the implications. If there was a culture capable of carving such a masterpiece 10,000 years ago, where did they go? What became of their technology, their language, their legacy? Today, we're going to peel back the layers of dust and dogma to look at the physical evidence that suggests the Sphinx might be the oldest and most controversial piece of architecture on the face of the earth. This isn't just a disagreement over dates, right? It's an investigation into the very origins of our story. And the answers? Well, they may rewrite everything we think we know about where we came from. Fellow history buffs, to understand why we are questioning the timeline of one of the world's most famous monuments, we first have to look at the official story. If you open any standard history textbook today, the narrative is, well, it's remarkably tidy. Mainstream Egyptology formally attributes the Great Sphinx to the pharaoh Khafre, who ruled during the 4th dynasty, roughly 4,500 years ago. The logic seems sound on the surface, right? The Sphinx sits directly in line with the causeway leading to Khafre's pyramid, and there's a temple nearby, the Sphinx Temple, that shares architectural DNA with the pharaoh's mortuary complex. To the establishment, the Sphinx is a masterwork of the Old Kingdom, a golden age of engineering where the Egyptians finally mastered the art of carving mountains into gods. It's a clean, logical narrative of power and piety. But fellow history buffs, when we move past the glossy pages of the textbooks and look at the actual archaeological record, the story begins to fracture. You see, the ancient Egyptians were perhaps the most meticulous record keepers of the ancient world. They carved their names, their lineage, and their achievements into almost every stone they touched. Yet, in the case of the Sphinx, there is a haunting silence. There is absolutely zero contemporary inscription, not a single line of hieroglyphs from the 4th dynasty that explicitly links Pharaoh Khafre to the construction of this monument. Solemnly, we are told he built it, but the Sphinx itself never says his name. Curiously, this lack of evidence creates a massive curiosity gap. I mean, why would a civilization so obsessed with legacy leave their greatest achievement anonymous? And that's where the mystery deepens. While the Egyptologists focus on the nearby tombs, geologists have been looking at something else entirely: the very walls of the Sphinx enclosure. Enthusiastically, when you examine the limestone surrounding the statue, You don't see the sharp horizontal scouring caused by thousands of years of desert wind and sand. Dramatic pause. Instead, you see deep, undulating vertical fissures, rounded gullies that in any other part of the world are the unmistakable fingerprints of heavy, persistent, cascading rainfall. Challenging? The problem? By the time Khafre supposedly took the throne in 2500 BCE, the Giza Plateau was already a parched, hyper-arid desert. For that kind of water erosion to occur, we have to look back to a much wetter epoch, a time when Egypt was a lush savanna. Teasingly, however, there was one detail everyone missed that suggests the Sphinx might have been hiding its true age in plain sight. Welcoming and warm, fellow history buffs, this is where the mystery moves from the realm of legend into the cold, hard reality of science. Intriguing? Enter Dr. Robert Schoch, a Boston University geologist who brought a fresh pair of eyes to the Giza Plateau. Conversational? He wasn't looking at the hieroglyphs or the pottery shards, He was looking at the stone itself. Dramatic? And what he found, it sent shockwaves through the halls of academia. Analytical? Schoch observed deep, undulating, vertical fissures in the Sphinx's body and the surrounding enclosure walls. Measured? To a geologist, these weren't just random cracks. These were the unmistakable calling cards of precipitation-induced weathering. Descriptive? Think about the way heavy rain carves deep, rounded grooves into a cliffside over centuries. This wasn't the sharp horizontal scouring caused by wind and sand that we see on every other monument in Giza. These were the tears of the sky, etched permanently into the limestone. Slightly cynical? But here is the catch that breaks the traditional timeline, right? Serious? For the Sphinx to show this level of water erosion, it would have needed to endure thousands of years of heavy, persistent, tropical rainfall. I mean, we are talking about a few light showers. We're talking about a climate that hasn't existed in Egypt for a very, very long time. According to paleoclimatologists, the Giza Plateau has been a hyper-arid desert for the last 5,000 years. Epic. To find a period where the Egyptian sky opened up with enough force to melt limestone like wax, you have to travel back past the dawn of the Pharaohs. Authoritative? You have to go back to the end of the last ice age, roughly 10,000 BCE, when the Sahara was a lush green savanna. Thoughtful? If the water carved the stone, the Sphinx had to be standing there to receive it. Let that sink in for a moment. If Schoch is right, the Sphinx isn't 4,500 years old. It's at least 10,000.
This creates a massive, unresolved crisis for our understanding of human history. At 10,000 BCE, mainstream history tells us humans were nothing more than simple hunter-gatherers, wandering the earth with stone tools and animal skins. They weren't supposed to be master architects. They weren't supposed to have the logistics, the math, or the motivation to carve a 60-foot-tall lion out of the bedrock. So, if the Great Sphinx was already standing there, weathered and ancient, when the first pharaohs arrived, it begs a question that changes everything. Who was there to build it during a time when civilization wasn't even supposed to exist? However, the age of the stone isn't the only thing that doesn't add up. Because when we look at the Sphinx's head, the math starts to get even stranger. Fellow history buffs, take a look at the Sphinx from a distance, and you'll notice something that really starts to bother every architect who sees it. The head is completely out of proportion. It's small, puny even, compared to the sprawling 60-foot-high limestone body. In a culture like ancient Egypt, where symmetry was a religious obsession, this is the equivalent of a forensic smoking gun. Intrigued? Forensic experts and master carvers have pointed out that you don't just accidentally make the head of the world's largest monolithic statue too small. The authoritative? The math suggests a much more logical, albeit controversial, explanation. the head we see today, the face of a pharaoh, wasn't the original. It was recarved. Imagine a massive, heavily weathered lion's head sitting in the sand for millennia until the stone began to crumble. When the dynastic Egyptians arrived, you see, they didn't build the Sphinx, they inherited it. To fix the ruin and claim it for their own, they carved a human face out of what remained of the original lion's neck. But because you can only carve away stone, never add it back, the resulting head had to be significantly smaller than the original. But why a lion in the first place? To answer that, we have to look up. Archaeoastronomers have used sophisticated software to rewind the night sky over Giza, accounting for the slow wobble of the Earth's axis known as the precession of the equinoxes. If you stand at the Sphinx today on the vernal equinox, the sun rises in the constellation of Pisces. During the time of the Pharaohs, it rose in Taurus. Neither of these fits the iconography of a lion. However, if you rewind the clock to roughly 10,500 BCE, something spectacular happens. As the sun peaks over the horizon on the morning of the spring equinox, it rises directly into the constellation of Leo. At that exact moment, a terrestrial lion made of stone would have been staring directly at its own celestial reflection in the sky. It wasn't just a statue, right? It was a sky-ground marker, a massive geological clock frozen at a specific moment in time. The Egyptians actually had a name for this era. They called it Zep Tepi, the first time. Their own ancient texts, like the Torah and King list and the Edfu texts, describe a legendary epic tens of thousands of years ago when gods and sages brought civilization to the Nile Valley. For decades, mainstream historians dismissed Zep Tepi as nothing more than a religious myth. But the geology and the stars are starting to tell a different story. They point to a lost episode of human history, a forgotten civilization that possessed high-level engineering and astronomical knowledge long before the first pharaoh was even born.
The evidence is carved in stone, but the biggest mystery isn't just what we can see on the surface, because while the Sphinx stares at the horizon, it's what's hidden directly beneath its paws that has the world's most powerful institutions looking the other way. However, when a team of researchers finally brought ground-penetrating radar to the Giza Plateau, they found something that wasn't supposed to exist. Fellow history buffs, deep beneath those massive stone paws, the radar didn't just find empty space. It found an echo of a forgotten world. A chamber, a library perhaps? Or a time capsule from an age the ancient Egyptians themselves called Zep Tepi, the first time. To the pharaohs, Zep Tepi wasn't just a myth, it was their history. They spoke of a golden age when the gods walked among men and the stars aligned in a way they wouldn't again for thousands of years. If the geological weathering on the Sphinx's body truly points to the end of the last ice age, then we aren't looking at a fourth dynasty monument. We are looking at a legacy from a civilization that survived a global cataclysm, the Great Flood that reset the clock for humanity. This is the ultimate payoff of the Sphinx mystery. It isn't just a statue, it's a geological clock. Its very skin etched by rains that stopped falling on the Giza Plateau millions of years ago. It stands as a silent sentinel, guarding the truth about a forgotten chapter of our species. If the timeline is wrong here, the entire map of human history needs to be torn up and rewritten. It means we aren't the first modern society to reach the pinnacle of knowledge. We are simply the latest to try and remember what was lost. We are living among the ruins of giants, fellow history buffs. And as we peel back the layers of sand and academic dogma, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. The past isn't just behind us, it's waiting to be rediscovered beneath the dust of ages, reminding us that we come from a lineage of survivors and architects whose names have been erased by time. Stay curious, because the story of our ancestors is far older and far more epic than any textbook ever dared to suggest. If you're ready to keep questioning the official narratives and digging into the mysteries of our world, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Global War Insights. Join our next expedition as we hunt for the truth hidden in plain sight. What do you think is hidden in that chamber beneath the paws? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, fellow history buffs, keep your eyes on the horizon.